What is going on, everyone? Anthony Drew Gary here, and this week I need to spend some time tackling the late breaking news out of the National Association of Realtors. There was a settlement that was reached. There are a whole bunch of news headlines about it, saying all sorts of things, true, untrue, and all of the above. And I've had some people ask me, what's it all mean? And so I want to do my best to share what I think it all means. A lot of this is going to be my opinion, but I think I'm going to sprinkle in enough facts to paint a picture that may not be all that it seems. But to do that appropriately, I want to start with all the news headlines because I think a lot of them have gotten carried away, and I'm going to explain exactly why I feel that way. So, the first headline out of CNN Business: the 6% commission on buying or selling a home is gone after Realtors Association agrees to a seismic settlement. Then we'll go to Morningstar. No more 6%. Buyers and sellers will soon negotiate their own commissions with agents. We'll go to a CBS affiliate. National Association of Realtors to cut commissions to settle lawsuits. And if you scroll down, you will see country's largest trade association requires home sellers to determine a commission rate, typically 6%, before listing homes on its property database, known as the Multiple Listing Service, or MLS. We'll go to Fox. Realtors, 6% commission on buying and selling homes is eliminated, and here's why. Then we'll go to NBC. The 6% commission on buying or selling a home is gone after Realtors Association agrees to seismic settlement. And so if you're seeing a common theme here about everybody attacking all these realtors and their 6% fixed commissions, and their inability to compromise and their monopoly and their predatory behaviors and all of the above, I want to put some of those details to bed, specifically in Indiana, I guess I can say. And so if I go back and I look at this again, I'm going to show you verbatim the listing contract to sell a home in Indiana. Now, if you're not in Indiana, I apologize. Indiana's a great place to be, but this is what governs the Indiana Association of Realtors. And so the first page talks about the who, what, where, when, and why, where the property is, how much you're going to sell it for, what sorts of lending you might accept, whether or not you're going to omit some typically kept items in the purchase contract. But then you get to page 2, and it talks about the exclusivity and that you're going to work with a specific broker to sell your house. And then you get to lines 84 and below that talks about the broker's commission. And it actually starts on line 79. I'm going to read some of this. It says broker's commission. The broker's commission charged by the listing broker for services rendered with respect to any listing is solely a matter of negotiation between broker and seller and is not fixed, controlled, suggested, recommended, or maintained by the Indiana Association of Realtors. Or in stretching that, the National Association of Realtors. And so, in effect, if you get to lines, we'll call it 86, there is a way to fill this out where the number is not 6%. In fact, I can attest to you that never once in my life as a realtor or the owner of Indie Dwell Real Estate have I personally charged 6% to sell somebody's house. And so this is completely negotiable. You can put into these lines whatever you want, but basically it says a percentage of the listing price or the sold price, but not less than a dollar figure. So basically you can set that up with a floor, or the other way to do this is to set it up as a percentage of an option, or you can set it up as a flat rate that you're going to sell somebody's house and you're going to charge them this much to do it. Then you get to line number 95, and line number 95 is where all of the bits and pieces of the settlement and the future changes really get into play here. And it says, seller has been advised of broker's cooperative compensation policy, including the amount of compensation that will be offered to cooperating brokers, which is a percent of the selling price, but not less than a fixed number of dollars. And so this is where the settlement really, the rubber meets the road here, I guess you could say. And so starting in mid-July, it is no longer going to be acceptable for a seller's agent and a listing to advertise a buyer's agency commission on the MLS or the BLC. That's the multiple listing service, or the broker's listing cooperative. And so those are simultaneous terms, basically mean the same thing. And what this effectively means is right now you can dangle a carrot out there if you are a seller to incentivize folks who are agents, who are brokers, who are realtors working with potential and would be buyers to bring you to the table willing, able, and qualified buyers for the house that you're trying to sell. And you do this in such a way that you offer a monetary compensation in order to bring someone to the table who can finish the transaction, get you across the finish line, close, and ultimately out of the proceeds of the sale of your house, you will compensate them modestly for it. And so that is the general idea of what a buyer's agency commission is. And so when we go back to the document itself, I'm curious if the language in this document is going to be manipulated as to remove some of those pieces, because you will no longer be allowed to advertise this. But that does not mean that you will no longer be allowed to actually put together a compensation structure such that you are offering some level of compensation for the buyer side of the transaction. So back to the settlement itself. It does not say that you cannot offer a buyer's agent commission. It says you cannot advertise it on the MLS or the BLC. So instead, what you're going to have is a bunch of brokers calling and texting one another, trying to figure out what the buyer's agent commission is for any given deal, because it will no longer be listed. That's not to say it's not going to continue to happen, but it's not out of the question that that a listing broker may take the stance that there is no buyer's agent commission for this listing anymore. And a few things that can happen here, one of which is directly tied to basically a piece of legislation that Governor Holcomb put into law that will also go into effect in July. And so if we go back here, we will pull up the buyer's exclusive agency contract, and it is effective in mid-July. It is going to be required that folks working with buyers will sign them up to a contract. And this has always been available, but sometimes it's not been used. You can make the argument that it has or has not been necessary. I can see both sides to it. But effectively, this document enters a would-be buyer and a would-be buyer's agent into a contract together for a fixed amount of time. You have to put an expiration date to this. And the broker agrees to diligently attempt to locate property acceptable to buyer, to negotiate price, terms, and conditions, and to ultimately get to the closing table and purchase a home. And you'll see in line 15, section C, this talks about broker's compensation. The first of which is a retainer fee, which is really wild to me because typically I only think of retainers in terms of lawyers. And so to call this out, to suggest that buyers could be paying non-refundable retainers, whether or not they end up buying a house or not, is wild to me. And I don't think I've ever seen this happen. I've been in and around real estate brokerages since 2008. And I don't think I've ever seen this happen. So the next step to this, probably the more practical of the two different options for compensation here, is that you offer them a commission. The buyer would offer the buyer's agent a commission here in consideration for the services to be performed by broker. Buyer agrees to pay broker a commission of a fixed number of dollars or a percentage of the total purchase price. And so this is effectively the same method of deciding what a buyer's agent is going to be paid. But this document suggests that it will be paid by the buyer, as compared to in previous schools of thought where this fee would be paid by the sellers. And so is it more or is it less? Who's to say? It's theoretically going to be paid by someone else now. Or is it? Let's talk about this a little further. Brokers will be helping folks write offers on houses, and they're probably going to have to start including in the other conditions of the contract that the buyer's broker will receive compensation out of seller proceeds, or that the buyer will receive a credit of some sum of money to cover the buyer's agent representation. That's one possible way that this could play out. But let's say for a second that that's not how it's going to be, that the sellers are drawing a line in the sand, that they're only going to pay their agent. They're not going to pay any sort of compensation for anybody working on the buyer side of the house. my opinion, this is the worst case scenario of all situations if you're thinking about first time home buyers. Truly no buyer's agent commission offered would basically mean that the same folks who are trying to save every dollar that they possibly can for a down payment will now have to think about this extra cost as part of the equation too. And so let's just break that down mathematically real quick here. Let's use an example that a first time home buyer is looking to buy a $300,000 house. And I use that example because it is getting hard, at least in Indianapolis, to find a move-in ready house for anything less than that. And so the minimum down payment of 3.5% on a $300,000 house is going to be $10,500. So we'll call that 10. You're probably going to have another $4,000 to $6,000 in closing costs. And that includes loan origination fees, prepaid costs, inspections, appraisals, et cetera, et cetera. And so now you're up to 15. And if you have to start asking those same folks to pay their own representation, you're probably over 20 grand. And what that practically means is that the number of buyers who are going to be able to afford the upfront cost of getting into and purchasing a house is going to crater. And if the number of qualified buyers takes a jump off a cliff, then the sellers are probably going to have to lower their prices to get their home sold because there's a fewer amount of buyers able to take them on. And so long story short, this could end up being a wash in the end. If you're not offering a buyer's agent commission or you're not offering a buyer's agent credit, but you're therefore not having as much activity on the market and you have to take a couple of price cuts to your house in order to get it sold, you're probably ending up somewhere in the same ballpark as you would have had none of this legislation or settlement language gone into play. And so when we think about this, practically speaking, I think a couple of different things are about to start being commonplace. The first of which is that sellers are going to continue to pay buyer's agent commissions for no other reason than to speed up the process of selling the house and to keep folks who are working with all of these buyers engaged in the process and to continue to have them bring qualified, willing, and able buyers to the table. And so the listing brokers won't be able to advertise this, but it's not to say that they won't still continue to build that into the structure of selling the house in that agreement. The next thing that we might see is, again, we talked about drawing that line in the sand. There will be no buyer's agent compensation on the seller side of the house. That may practically mean that houses will sit on the market longer for those folks because listing activity or showing activity could be lessened by the fact that there's no incentive on that side of the house, especially if you're a buyer's agent who's working with a first-time home buyer who cannot afford to cover the down payment plus the closing cost plus a buyer's agent commission. That's going to wipe those folks out of the ballpark, and they're not going to be able to come and see your house. But the other maybe different thought to this and what could happen is that you could have some buyers, first time or otherwise, fearing that they'll have to pay buyer agent commissions, and they're going to start contacting the listing brokers directly so that there's only one broker involved in the transaction and they don't have to pay their own buyer's agent fee. Now, theoretically, this happens with regularity, but there is an elephant in the room here is that you have to be comfortable as a buyer with that situation, because if there's one agent or one realtor, one broker who is representing both sides of the house, being the buyer and the seller, you cannot expect a full fiduciary level of dedication to you because you don't have someone solely working for you. And so there's the possibility that you're not going to get, the same level of negotiation that you would otherwise. You may not get the same terms you would otherwise. It's just a piece of the equation that you have to consider. And if you're not an expert in the real estate industry, you probably want to have somebody in your corner that is working exclusively with you. And so wanted to make this video really to answer the question, how do I feel about the settlement that's come out? And in reality, I don't think a ton is going to change either in the short term or in the long term. I think that there is going to be an understanding among sellers that incentivizing the other side of the house to bring willing and able buyers to the table is worth the opportunity to compensate those folks for their ability to bring the buyers to the table and execute on the transaction quickly. So if you find yourself in a situation where you need some expertise in this, please get in touch with someone. That's going to wrap up this episode of the show. If you have any comments that you agree with what I was thinking about, let me know about it down below. If you disagree with what I'm thinking about, let me know down below as well. As always, you can subscribe to the channel to be the first to know about new content each and every Wednesday. You can hit the little notification bell too. And if you are looking to transact real estate in the Indianapolis or greater Indiana markets, you can get in touch with me either in the comments or at indiedwell.com. Till next time, this is Anthony Drew Gary, host of the How To Show, signing off.